Imagine you have just ascended to the throne after the time of troubles. Your word is tax, sentence, and truth. And suddenly you receive a report. Another order of time still exists across the country. On the towers are dials with letters. The counting is not in 12 and 24, but in 17. This is not decoration. It is a reminder that before you, there was its own law, its own measure, its own rhythm. And as long as people live by foreign clocks, they think not in your power. One of your decrees, and the old count is declared a mistake, new clocks become the norm, and those who argue appear as rebels against the single order. What will you choose? To leave people their old time, or to rewrite time itself so that the past no longer has a voice? Now let's see how this looked in real history. Stop for a moment in front of the tower clock of Alexandrovskaya Sloboda. Do not hurry past as if this is just another museum exhibit. Come closer and gaze at the dial that once counted the time for an entire empire. On it are two rotating discs covered with numbers of two types: Old Slavic letters denoting numbers and Arabic numerals that are familiar to us from childhood. They run parallel, duplicating each other, from 1 to 17. Stop at this number. Not 12, as we are used to seeing on wristwatches, not 24, as the modern day is divided, 17. It is this number that divides the circle into unequal segments. Each segment did not once count the minutes and seconds that we are accustomed to, but something completely different. Pay attention to the arrow. Rather, to what performs the function of the arrow in this construction. It is made in the shape of the sun with diverging rays and is fixed at the top of the dial. Fixed firmly. It does not move. It has never moved. The disc with the numbers rotates slowly, passing under the immobile solar indicator. Moreover, it rotates in the direction we today call counterclockwise. Think about this expression for a moment. Counterclockwise. Where did this phrase even come from if the hand was immobile in those times? Who decided that the direction in which modern clocks move is the correct one, and that the reverse movement should be designated by a negation? Maybe it was the other way around? Recall other examples of mirroring between Russian and Western traditions. We cross ourselves from right to left, 3 fingers to the right shoulder, then to the left. In the West, they cross themselves from left to right. We wear the wedding ring on the right hand. They wear it on the left. We strike the bell by swinging the clapper inside the stationary bell. In the West, they swing the bell itself while leaving the clapper in place. Everywhere this mirror image, as if two branches of one culture consciously turned in opposite directions. And the clock, yet another confirmation. The movement in a circle in the direction that the ancient Russian disk with 17 divisions rotated was perhaps the true norm. And what we today consider correct and natural is merely a later distortion imposed from the outside along with the new clocks. Look at the very mechanism that has been preserved in the museum. The gears from the 15th century, made of metal with astonishing precision. A wooden shaft from the same era, crafted in such a way that, centuries later, it is still capable of bearing load. And here is what is especially strange: the weight. Officially, it is called white stone. The gears are metal, the shaft is wooden, and the weight is made of stone. Why make a weight out of stone if it needs to be heavy? Metal is much denser. But take a closer look. This white stone mass does not look like natural stone hewn from a cliff. It is too smooth, too uniform, as if it was cast in a mold. What if this so-called stone is not a natural material at all? What if we are looking at that very geopolymer concrete that is hardly talked about? A technology that allows the creation of blocks of any shape by mixing crushed rock with binding substances. It is much easier to cast such a weight into the desired shape than to carve it from a solid piece of granite. There is one more detail that cannot be verified without the museum's permission. By its appearance, the weight resembles not a monolithic stone, but a hollow shape, like a clay vessel covered with a white mass. If this is true, if there is emptiness inside, then the technology becomes even more interesting. Casting a hollow weight of a specified mass by filling the internal cavity with sand or metal shot for precise balancing is an engineering level that seems impossible for the 15th century. But then a question arises that disrupts the usual worldview. Who possessed such technologies? Where did the knowledge of geopolymers come from, if official science tells us that this is a 20th century discovery? And if this weight was cast, then using the same technology, they could cast the white stone blocks for the temples. All those structures that are presented to us as a result of the hardest labor of stonemasons who chiseled each block by hand. In the center of the dial is depicted a starry sky, the moon, the month, a scattering of stars. We are told that this is a decorative element, nothing more. But why specifically a starry sky? Why not heraldic symbols, religious images, or portraits of rulers? Perhaps this is not an ornament, but a functional element? A map of the heavens, used to determine not only the time of day, but also the position in a longer cycle. An astronomical device, rather than just a clock for counting morning and evening prayers. These clocks hung in Alexandrovskaya Sloboda during the reign of Ivan the Terrible, when it effectively became the capital of the state. Later, they continued to function under Alexei Mikhailovich, the father of Peter I. But the most astonishing part is different. Similar clocks did not exist only here. An identical 17-hour dial adorned the Spasskaya Tower of the Moscow Kremlin. Similar mechanisms were located in Suzdal, on the belfry of the Kremlin. Throughout Russia, cities measured time according to one system, a system with 17 divisions. But in Moscow, there was another important detail that is carefully overlooked today. The Spasskaya Tower had not one, but two tiers of clocks. The lower tier indicated the time of day with 17 divisions, and the diameter of this clock face reached several meters. It was visible from the opposite end of the square. However, the upper tier had a completely different structure. There were depicted 12 signs of the zodiac: Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, and all the other symbols that humanity has associated with the movement of the sun across the celestial dome since ancient times. And under each zodiac sign were numbers from 1 to 12. 2 circles, 2 rhythms, 1 system. Look at the logic of this construction. At the bottom, there are 17 divisions to measure daily time. At the top, there are 12 divisions to track the months and seasons of the year. This is not just a clock in the modern understanding. This is an astronomical device. The zodiac circle slowly rotated, marking the passage of the sun through the constellations. The 17-hour dial at the bottom recorded the position of the day. Together, they formed a unified system of timekeeping that accounted for both daily cycles and the annual rhythms of nature. Today, the place on the Spasskaya Tower where these two-tiered clocks once stood is vacant. Our famous chimes are embedded where the zodiac circle used to be. And surprisingly, the modern clock clearly does not fit in size. To install them, it was necessary to saw off the inner columns of the tower. It creates the impression that this is a trophy mechanism, brought from somewhere outside and crammed into a space for which it was not intended. Not custom-made clocks for the main tower of the Kremlin, but something taken from another place and hastily repurposed. Where did this system come from? Who created the clock with 17 divisions, and why was it unified across the entire territory? The answer to this question lies in the name of the person whose name has been preserved in the chronicles: Lazarus Srbin, a monk who came from Serbian lands. It was he who, according to official history, in 1404 gathered and installed the first clock on the Frolov Tower of the Moscow Kremlin, the very tower that was later renamed Spasskaya when an icon of the Savior of Smolensk was hung on it. But think about the strangeness of this situation. Serbia and Moscow Rus in the early 15th century is thousands of kilometers apart. Different languages, different alphabets, different cultural traditions. Why would a monk from distant Serbia go to Moscow to make clocks? Why didn't they find a Russian master who could handle this task? And most importantly, how did he learn about the system with 17 divisions? How did it turn out that Lazar came and made the clocks according to the Russian system of timekeeping, with Russian Old Slavic numbers on the dial? There is only one logical explanation. Lazar Srbin was not a foreigner in the full sense of the word. He did not bring foreign technology and did not learn from Moscow masters from scratch. He owned this system from the beginning. Because Serbia and Rus were parts of one civilization, not in the sense of a political union or cultural influence, but in the sense of a single space where the same knowledge, the same technologies, and the same standards circulated. Look at the maps of the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries. The territory from the Balkans to Siberia was designated by various names: Great Tartary, Moscow Tartary, Independent Tartary. The borders shifted, regions were renamed, but the essence remained unchanged. It was a unified cultural and technological space. Lazar Srbin was not a foreign guest teaching the savages the intricacies of European mechanics. He was a master from another part of one empire who came to the capital to fulfill a state order. This is precisely why the dials of Russian clocks feature two scripts simultaneously: Arabic numerals and Old Church Slavonic letters representing numbers. Not because one nation borrowed from another, but because within the framework of this civilization, both methods of recording numerical values existed in parallel and were equally understandable. Arabic numerals in Rus, Old Church Slavonic writing in the Balkans. This is the norm, not an exception to the rules. There is one detail that is easy to miss. There is no titlo over the Old Slavic letters on the dial. A titlo is a diacritical mark, a small wavy line that in ancient Russian writing indicated that the letter represents a number rather than a sound. Without the titlo, the letter A is simply read as a letter. With the titlo, as the unit. This is a strict rule that was followed in all documents, on coins, in inscriptions on buildings. But on these clocks, there is no titlo. Why? Because for those who created the mechanism, the context was obvious. The dial itself indicates that these are numbers. Adding titlo would be unnecessary, like writing the word digit above each button on a modern calculator. This is a sign of deep, natural mastery of the system. Not late copying with errors, but organic understanding. The modern clock on the Spasskaya Tower tells a different story. They appeared there in the early 18th century, after that very convenient fire. The mechanism was brought from Holland. The dial is divided into 12 parts with Roman numerals. The hands move, the disc is stationary. Everything is the opposite compared to the Russian system. And the most telling thing? The size. The clock is clearly smaller than necessary for a tower of such scale. It was necessary to saw off the inner columns, widen the opening, adjust the space for the foreign mechanism. It is as if they took ready-made clocks from somewhere and squeezed them into a place where they were not meant to be. Not a special order for the main symbol of the state, but a trophy that accidentally happened to be at hand. But if this system was unified, if the masters from Serbia and Rus worked according to the same standards, then the following question arises. Why exactly 17? What is this number? What logic lies behind such a division of the day? The official version offers us an explanation that falls apart at the first check. Supposedly, the day was divided into daylight and nighttime hours, and their duration changed depending on the season. In summer, there were 17 daylight hours and 7 nighttime hours. In winter, it was the opposite. But how could this work in practice? Imagine that you were arranging a meeting. On a summer day, an hour lasts longer than in winter. How did people synchronize their actions? How did trade work if the duration of working hours constantly changed? How did government administration function if the length of an hour was not constant? This is absurd. Any system of measuring time exists to create stability and predictability. And a system with a floating duration of an hour creates chaos. There must be another explanation. Perhaps 17 is related to lunar cycles or the ratio of day and night in the mid-latitudes. Maybe 17 hours multiplied by 12 zodiac signs gives a number close to important astronomical calculations. The system could have been not just daily, but calendar astronomical, showing the position in the annual cycle. We are trying to understand this system through the lens of our modern concepts. We divide the day into 24 equal parts because it is convenient for synchronizing industry, for the operation of factories, for train schedules, for coordination of actions on a continental scale. But the ancient system, with 17 divisions, could have been more complex and precise. It could have taken into account real astronomical cycles rather than abstract segments of mechanical time. But if this is the case, if the system was so advanced, then why are there no detailed descriptions of it left? Why are we forced to guess instead of reading instructions and treatises? The answer is simple, because the sources contradict each other, and these contradictions say a lot. Open the Illuminated Chronicle. There is an illustration dedicated to the installation of the clock by Lazar Serbin. The drawing depicts towers, churches, and the clock itself. But look at the dial that the ancient artist drew. It has 12 divisions, from 1 to 12. And it seems there are already hands. That is, the dial itself is stationary, while the indicators move across it. A completely different design compared to what the witnesses described. Now look at the drawing by the Austrian Baron Meyerberg, made in 1661. He came to Moscow as the emperor's ambassador and kept a detailed travel diary. In his sketch, the Frolov clock is depicted with a 17-hour dial. 2 tiers are clearly distinguishable. The Baron even noted small details: the carving on the case, the shape of the hands, the style of the numbers. This is not a schematic sketch, but a careful drawing from life. Meyerberg was not a historian and did not attempt to please the Russian court. He drew what he saw with his own eyes while standing in Red Square. Whom to believe? The Russian chronicle, where the artist depicted a 12-hour dial, or the foreign diplomat who recorded 17 divisions? Think logically. Meyerberg was a witness. He did not copy someone else's texts and did not reproduce descriptions from second-hand sources. He saw. And the Illustrated Chronicle is a compilation created much later than the events. The artist who illustrated the text probably never saw these clocks. He drew based on a description, and he depicted what was understandable to him: ordinary clocks with 12 divisions, because such clocks were familiar in his time. And what about the chronicle itself, where Lazar Serbin is mentioned? The Trinity Chronicle, which contains this mention, was discovered by the German academic Gerhard Friedrich Müller in the 1760s. 50 years later, it burned during the fire in Moscow in 1812. How convenient. It is impossible to verify the authenticity of the text. Only lists remain, copies made from the original, copies that we must take at their word. Yes, the chronicles burned. Yes, the mechanisms were destroyed. But let's not dwell on the fires. Enough has already been said about that. What is more important is something else. Why draw a 12-hour clock face in the chronicle instead of a 17-hour one? Why create a false impression of what these clocks looked like? Because the 17-hour system is not just another way to count minutes. It is proof of the existence of a civilization that possessed knowledge that was lost later. To destroy this system meant to erase the memory of it. In 1700, the reform gains momentum. Peter I changes the calendar. Instead of the year 7208 from the creation of the world, the year 1700 from the birth of Christ begins. Simultaneously with the calendar, the system of time changes. Russian clocks with a 17-hour dial are removed from the Spasskaya Tower. In their place, European clocks with 12 divisions and Roman numerals are installed. The new year is now celebrated not in spring, when nature awakens, but in winter, on the coldest night. Days begin not with the rising sun, but after midnight, in darkness. A decree on the removal of all chronicles and chronographs. The creation of the Petersburg Academy of Sciences with the task of rewriting history, proving the barbarism and savagery of the Russian past. All of this is links in one chain. The destruction of the old system of time and its replacement with a new one. But Peter did not act alone. The same wave of calendar and temporal reforms is sweeping across Europe. The Gregorian calendar, the Julian calendar, all of them are introduced and adjusted in the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries. Why then? Because it is during this period that the destruction of the unified system of timekeeping, which existed over a vast territory, occurs. And here is what is surprising. No original clocks with a 17-hour dial have survived. Not a single mechanism that could be disassembled, studied, or understood in terms of its operation. All the specimens we see in museums are reconstructions. Recreated models made in the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries based on drawings and descriptions. Even those gears and the white stone weight in Alexandrovskaya Sloboda, how can we be sure that these are genuine details from the 15th century and not later imitations. Time is not just a way to organize your day. Time is the code of civilization. If there is one system of timekeeping from the Balkans to Siberia, it signifies common trade, logistics, astronomical calculations, state and religious rhythms. This is only possible in a unified state or a closely linked union of territories. Lazar Serbin makes clocks in Moscow. The mechanisms in Suzdal and Alexandrov operate on the same system. Masters from different cities know one technology. They use the same fonts to denote numbers. They understand how to relate daily cycles to annual ones through the zodiac circle. This is not cultural influence, not borrowing ideas through merchants and travelers. This is a standard. Just as today, around the world, 24 hours in a day are accepted, at that time, the standard was 17. On the maps of that time, this territory is marked as Tartaria. Modern historians will tell you that this is simply a geographical name, a conditional designation of little-studied lands, no more than that. But how then can one explain the unity of the timekeeping system? How to explain that a master from Serbia freely works in Moscow, knowing all the nuances of local tradition? How to explain that the technology for making white stone weights by means of geopolymer casting is present in different corners of this vast space? Architecture can be renamed. Ancient temples can be called structures of a later time. Maps can be redrawn, borders moved, names changed. But time is what people use daily. Clocks hang in central squares, on the towers of Kremlins, on church bell towers. As long as there are clocks with 17 divisions, people remember that there was another system. Therefore, they were destroyed first of all, not as valuables that can be appropriated, but as evidence that must be erased. And here is what is most surprising. They were destroyed so thoroughly that today we can only guess about the true operation of the system. But some things are known. Bells were attached to the clocks, not one, but several of different sizes and tones. When the disc reached a certain division, the mechanism activated a hammer that struck the bell. Different divisions, different bells. Each hour of the day had its own sound. A person hearing the bell could determine the time without even looking at the tower. The blind beggar at the temple gates knew when the time for the evening alms would come. The merchant at the market heard the strike that signified the closing of trade. The system worked not only visually, but also acoustically, pervading the whole city with the rhythm of 17 divisions. 17 hours on the dial is not a technical error. It is not a local whim of one region. It is not an attempt by medieval masters to invent something of their own, unaware of the achievements of Europe. It is a shard of a world that existed before the Great Reboot. A world where time was measured not by mechanical intervals, but by the real movements of celestial bodies. Where 17 divisions of the day corresponded to some astronomical calculations that we have lost today. We live with a simplified system. 24 hours in a day are convenient for synchronizing factories, offices, and transport. This is the standard of the industrial era, when precision relative to other people is more important than precision relative to space. Meeting at 10 in the morning means that both people looked at the same mechanical clock and agreed on a point in an arbitrary scale of time. This is convenient, but it is not related to the actual position of the sun, moon, or stars. The ancient system with 17 hours was more complex. It required an understanding of astronomy. It demanded observation of the sky, not just a glance at the dial. But it was this complexity that made it more accurate. It took into account not abstract seconds measured by a mechanism, but real natural rhythms. The change of seasons, the phases of the moon, the passage of the sun through the zodiac constellations. All this combined into a single picture, where time was not a linear sequence of identical segments, but a living process connected to the cosmos. We have not just lost another way to count minutes. We have lost an entire philosophy of time. The understanding that a person is part of natural cycles, not a separate unit living by an artificial schedule. The technologies for creating precise astronomical instruments without computers and electronics. The mathematics that allows one to calculate lunar phases and solar cycles with the accuracy required to construct a calendar for years to come. Along with the clocks, the understanding that Serbia and Rus were not different worlds disappeared. They were parts of one system, a system where a master could come from one end to the other and work to common standards, without needing translators to explain technical nuances. Where two fonts existed in parallel because both were native to this civilization. Where white stone was poured into molds, creating details of any complexity, and this was not considered something extraordinary. 17 hours is a question without an answer, a mystery that we can no longer solve because all the keys have been destroyed. We see the result, but do not understand the cause. We know that the system existed, but do not know how it worked. And most importantly, we do not know who created it. Which civilization possessed such knowledge? How far did its territory extend? How long did it exist before the annihilation of all traces began? The clock in Alexandrovskaya Sloboda is silent. It stands behind the glass of a museum showcase, reconstructed from fragments of information. A white stone weight that may hold the secret of geopolymer technologies. Gears that once counted not our hours, but those of some others. A dial with 17 divisions, the meaning of which eludes us. And a starry sky in the center, reminding us that time was once measured not by a winding mechanism, but by the movement of celestial bodies. We live by someone else's clocks, by a system imposed by reforms. We do not know how long an hour lasted in that system, how our ancestors synchronized life with the cosmos. Why exactly 17? Perhaps we will never know. Knowledge has been erased too thoroughly. Imagine a city where every tower has such a clock. 17 divisions, a rotating disc. A merchant from distant lands looks at the dial and immediately understands the time. He does not need translators. He does not need explanations. In Moscow, there are 17 divisions. In Suzdal, 17. In Alexandrov, 17. In Novgorod, Pskov, Yaroslavl, everywhere there is one system. This is not just convenience. It is a sign of deep organization. A state capable of maintaining a unified standard of timekeeping over such a territory must possess a developed system of communications, central authority, and schools for craftsmen. Pay attention to one detail that speaks volumes about the creators of these clocks. There is no titlo above the old Slavonic letters on the dial. The titlo is a special mark above a letter that transforms it from a sound into a number. Without the titlo, A is read as a letter. With the titlo, it is read as 1. In Church Slavonic texts, the omission of the titlo was considered a gross error. But there is no titla on the clock. Why? The context leaves no doubt. A circle divided into segments, numbers in order. Everything shouts that this is a numerical sequence. Adding a titla would be excessive. This is a sign of natural mastery of the system. The clocks were made not by scribes, but by engineers for whom numbers were a working tool. People who calculated the transmission numbers of gears. For them, the absence of a titla is the norm, just as a modern engineer does not place a period after each number in a drawing. Perhaps the answer lies not in the mathematics of the clocks themselves, but in how they related to the calendar. Recall the upper level of the Spasskaya Tower. 12 signs of the zodiac, 12 months of the year. The sun passes through each constellation in about a month. This is well known. But what if the 17-hour dial below was not just a separate mechanism, but part of a larger system of calculation? What if 17 multiplied by a certain number of days related to lunar phases resulted in a figure that is a multiple of the annual cycle? The moon goes through all its phases in 29.5 days. This is approximately 30 days, the length of a month in most calendars. If you divide the month into segments of 17 hours, no, that doesn't add up directly. But what if we think differently? What if 17 is not the number of equal segments in the days, but the number of daytime periods of a certain length that add up to a longer cycle? Then night could be measured separately, or not measured at all in the same units. Remember that the disk rotated only during the day. At night, when the sun hid below the horizon, the system ceased to function in the same mode. Perhaps nighttime was considered separately. By the position of the stars, by the phase of the moon, by another dial that has not survived or that we simply do not know about. And the 17 daytime hours served to measure the active, bright time when people worked, traded, and traveled. If this is the case, then the system becomes even more complex. Two types of time: daytime, measured in relation to the sun, and nighttime, measured in relation to the stars and the moon. Both types are connected through the zodiac circle, which shows the position of the sun among the constellations. This explains why the upper tier of the clock on Spasskaya Tower was necessary. It synchronized the daytime and nighttime systems through the annual cycle. It served as a bridge between short-term measurements and long-term astronomical observations. But if all of this is true, if the system was so well thought out and complex, then its creation required decades, maybe even centuries of development. One cannot wake up one morning and invent such a system from scratch. Observations are needed. Records of the movements of celestial bodies over many years. Mathematical calculations verified in practice. Testing different division options until finding the one that best corresponds to natural rhythms. And all of this was supposed to take place within a stable society that was not interrupted by wars, disasters, or changes in cultural paradigms. Such a society existed. Its traces are visible not only in clocks, but also in other technologies. Stone construction, where blocks are connected without mortar. Geometrically perfect temples with ideal acoustics. Metallurgy, allowing the creation of gears with such precision that they work for centuries. All this is evidence of a highly developed civilization possessing complex knowledge in astronomy, mathematics, and engineering. On old maps, this territory was called by various names: Great Tartary, Moscow Tartary, Independent Tartary. The names changed, the borders shifted, but the essence remained. It was one civilization with a unified system of measures and weights, a unified chronology, and unified technologies. The destruction of this civilization began not with wars, but with the replacement of standards. The calendar was changed, and the system of time was simplified. But the most terrible thing is that the bearers of knowledge were destroyed. Master watchmakers, who possessed the secrets of crafting 17-hour mechanisms, suddenly disappear from documents. In the craftsman's census of the 17th century, they are still mentioned. By the beginning of the 18th, they are gone. Continuity was severed. Students did not receive knowledge from teachers. The technology of white stone weights, precise gear cutting, astronomical calculations, all disappeared with the last generation. The clock in Alexandrovskaya Sloboda is a museum exhibit recreated from drawings. We cannot understand how it worked in real life, how people used 17 divisions in everyday life, how they linked daytime to nighttime through the annual cycle. All of this has gone, and not by itself, not because of natural development, but as a result of deliberate actions. Peter I changes the calendar and the system of time at the same time, to remove everything Russian, everything old. New clocks with 12 divisions, new academicians from Europe, and the originals conveniently burn in fires. The Trinity Chronicle was found by the German Miller and burned 50 years later. The clocks on the towers burned and were replaced. Everywhere, one scheme. But despite the thoroughness of the purge, traces seep into unexpected places. The drawing of the Austrian Baron Meyerberg, made in 1661. He arrived in Moscow as an ambassador and sketched the clock of the Frolovskaya Tower for personal records. The sketch clearly shows the 17-hour dial, with a stationary sun at the top. There was no reason for him to falsify. He was simply recording what he saw. This is why his drawing is more valuable than dozens of chronicle texts copied later for unknown purposes. The reconstruction in Alexandrovskaya Sloboda preserves the memory of what real clocks looked like. References in folk songs where time is measured differently. In 1952, the Soviet animated film The Scarlet Flower was released. Attentive viewers will notice, in one frame, the clock in the palace has 12 divisions, and a moment later, 17. The artist knew of the existence of both systems, and either consciously left a hint or worked from different sources. There is one more detail that is rarely discussed. In the records of craftsmen from the 17th century, a special category of masters is mentioned: clockmakers. There are few of them, a few individuals in a major city. This is a narrow specialization that requires long training. By the mid-18th century, this category disappears from documents. It simply ceases to exist. Instead, European-style watchmakers appear, working with imported mechanisms. The old school has come to an end. Knowledge was not passed on to the next generation. Perhaps the last masters were simply not allowed to take on students, or they were forcibly retrained, or they passed away without finding anyone to whom they could trust their secrets. 17 hours on the clock face is a crack in the official history, a detail that does not fit into the overall picture. We are told that Rus was a backward country, just emerging from barbarism, that technology came from the West. But clocks with 17 divisions speak otherwise, about an advanced system, about masters who understood astronomy, about unified standards across a vast territory. about the fact that Serbia and Rus were not foreign worlds. With the system, the understanding of time as a living process connected to the rotation of the planet and the movement of celestial bodies disappeared. Time was part of nature, flowing with the sun, the moon, and the constellations. Man was part of this flow, not an observer from the outside. Modern time is a convenience for factories and offices. 24 equal segments, not tied to sunrise or sunset. Time has become a commodity that is sold and bought. It is said that time is money. Every second must be used productively, measured, calculated, optimized. The ancient system with 17 hours had a different approach. Time could not be bought or sold there. It could not be accelerated or slowed down at will. It flowed with the sky. And most importantly, this system worked in practice. Otherwise, it would not have been replicated throughout the country. Otherwise, Lazar Serbin would not have come from thousands of kilometers away to reproduce the standard familiar to him. The dial with 17 divisions silently asks us, how much more do we not know about the past? How many more systems have been destroyed? How much more knowledge has been lost? Why destroy a functioning system and replace it with a more primitive one? There is only one answer: so that we forget who we are, so that we do not know where we came from, so that we do not seek connections with the civilization that stretched from sea to sea and knew time not by winding springs, but by the eternal movement of stars. Subscribe to the channel. Do not forget to click the bell so you do not miss new investigations. There are still many mysteries and discoveries ahead. We will continue to look for evidence, ask uncomfortable questions, explore what official science avoids. Because the truth is always close. You just need to want to see it.